So maybe introductions might be a way to start.
Sure.
So I'm Jimmy.
I'm Peter. I'm a 2L here.
I'm Jeff Peterson. I'm retired from EPA, but working on coastal and climate change.
So Jeff, where did EPA? I was curious.
Well, mostly Office of Water
Okay.
and National Water Program.
Office of Water in DC. Have we met before? I did a fair bit of. We brought a fair number of lawsuits against you as EPA. Office of Water.
No, I never worked in OGC, so I dodged most of the legal battles.
So Carol Ann Siciliano.
Oh, yeah. I know Carol Ann very well. She lives down the street from me.
She's great. Jim Curtin.
Yeah.
I can't remember who else, but yeah, we'll probably do that.
Yes. Well, there's a great law team in OGC, or there was.
Yeah.
I've been retired since 2017, so there's been a lot of turnover.
Okay. Well, I hope you extend my regards to Carol.
I just came from the EPA.
Oh, yeah. And tell me your name again?
Peter.
Peter.
Fasoli. Fasoli.
And Peter, you're a 2L?
Yeah.
What classes are you taking?
Right now, I'm externing at the EPA, so it's taking up a lot of my time and credits, but right now I'm taking natural resources law and then evidence.
Mhm.
But last semester I took environmental law, admin law, climate change law and justice, and corporate law.
Nice. So you're really into this,
Yeah,
Nice.
it's kind of been overturned in the last 2 weeks in terms of the path I was planning on taking, but you know, here we are. I was actually set to be with OGC this summer at EPA, but that got
So you were one of the interns who.
it got rescinded. Yeah.
How did that come through to you? An email?
One sentence email. Yeah.
What did it say?
Due to the presidential memorandum, like executive order. At the time, it was even labeled as presidential memorandum.
Okay.
It was like the 22nd, and that went through on the 20th, like
Gotcha.
at night. They just said presidential memorandum. You know, federal hiring freeze. We hear this job offer's hereby rescinded, and they're sorry for any inconvenience.
Had you already accepted it?
So it was a tentative offer
Oh.
that I had. So the way they do it apparently is I was selected for it's like an honors law clerk thing that they do. I was selected at the end of October. They like said, here's your indication of selection. Like, we've selected you. Do you accept our selection? Do you want us to move forward with the process? Essentially, so they didn't waste their time sending me all the forms and stuff. I said yes. Then they reached back out mid-December with like, here's the form you have to fill out. Filling it out will serve as your acceptance of the offer, and then pending your clearance, you'll be like officially onboarded. I hadn't gone through, so I accepted, but the clearance hadn't gone through and the onboarding hadn't gone through, so I wasn't technically hired.
Yeah.
And also the executive order, if you didn't have a start date post February 8th, it didn't matter if you had accepted or not. So even if you were starting post February 8th, even if you had accepted and been onboarded, it didn't matter. So now I'm back on the market.
Ooh, that's rough.
Well, we'll keep you in mind.
Thank you.
Here.
Yeah, but yeah. So you know, excited to explore other opportunities, I suppose.
I've got to imagine some of those might open back up, though.
We'll see. I mean,
Right? I
it
mean,
was,
to put you in a bad position of having to choose.
yeah,
find
because
something else,
I mean,
right?
it's hard because a lot of the stuff now is like risk being unpaid.
Sure.
And in order to get funding from GW, I have to submit an application for funding
Yeah.
at a certain by April 1st. So it's like weighing.
Yeah.
Do I take an unpaid, like, do I wait? Like, I'm not gonna wait, my anxiety is generally too high to like wait for that. And, like,
Understood,
nothing's
yeah.
guaranteed. And it's been like an agent by agency kind of basis in terms of, some of them are even rescinding unpaid volunteer positions for the summer because they don't know fully. But mine was paid, I was GS7 scale, so like they flagged me immediately and were like, we're rescinding it because you're getting money from us, so. No, it's okay, I got my first interview scheduled next week, so we'll see, it's with a nonprofit, so we'll see what that pans out.
So hello everyone, my name is Viola Albertinazzi. I work as associate at Inter-American Institute on Justice and Sustainability. It's a small startup. The CEO is Claudia De Wind. She cannot be here today unfortunately, so she sent me. Really happy to be here.
Thanks. You're welcome. Marianne Grandamanley. I work with IRA on adaptation leader issues, among other work I do for different groups and clients on other all environment and sustainability related issues. I'm also a lawyer. Jim was my environmental law professor back in the day, so you can see why I stuck with it. It really makes all of this extraordinarily compelling to learn about and to do better about, right? So yeah, I followed the constitutional law junkies into the room, and I don't know. I mean, and I also was able to get an early view of the article that he mentioned that he and Ira worked on the constitutional revolution as it relates to managed retreat and receiving communities. So I've been pondering a lot of what was written in that article since it was published. And I just really feel like we're at a very interesting time, for lack of a better or less, I don't know, doomsday description. I also just want to share that I'm also an optimist pretty much across the board, and it's hard for me to get really negative about the law. So one of the things that I try to talk to my adult children about when they are very upset about the current state of affairs right now is that I really do truly believe that the justice system, for the most part, is unpredictable, and that judges aren't necessarily good or bad, right or left, that it's very case specific, very issue specific. So I do try to keep an open mind when I think about what might be coming down the pike about, we don't always know what the judges are gonna decide. So even though right now it might feel a little bit hard and hopeless, I always keep something in my back pocket, I guess, thinking about that. If for the right case with the right circumstances and the right facts, we could get some unexpected wins, hopefully. But Jim might disagree. That's sort of my take on it. So anyway, I do think about these issues a lot, and I do have people that I live with in my household who are pretty unwound at the moment, away at college at the time, but right now. But so it's front of mind for me, both regarding environment, dignity, all the issues we've been talking about today. I don't have any real. You said, what do we want to talk about? I don't know that I have anything in particular, but those are just some of the things I think about when we're talking about the constitutional and the legal issues surrounding these, what are going to be very difficult policy and practical things that have to happen in the country.
If I could throw in, I'm currently writing my journal note for the Energy and Environmental Law Journal on the right to travel related to internal climate displacement.
Okay,
Yeah.
tell us about it.
Yeah, so I am generally, it's more of like a thought piece, philosophical thought piece that my supervisor is describing it as, but it's essentially thinking about in the future, especially with internal US displacement, given, I open up talking about Helene and Milton, and I've now, in my newest draft, added California wildfires and stuff like that, hypothesizing whether or not the right to travel, both intra or interstate, and then especially the strict scrutiny tests, are apt to handle massive influxes of people going from one state to another. And I'm analyzing the development of the right to travel post-COVID, because that's like the most recent example of courts diving into the right to travel and things like that. And it's specifically the public health exception that they've drawn out for the compelling state interest test, and whether or not a state would be able to, given the interdisciplinary problems that climate displacement and climate change brings would be able to justify limiting people's travel into a state or within a state through this kind of avenue, and predicting that the strict scrutiny test needs some development, additional factors that might need to be considered, given how massive of a like just how big of a problem of like multiple factors and things taken into account, economics, health, land, everything that a judge might need to consider. I'm essentially writing this as if like I'm a law clerk in a future case where this problem's come up, and like what am I presenting to the judge that they might need to do in this case.
So, can I ask you a question? Is part of it coming up with reasons that might be compelling, you know, with the strict scrutiny analysis?
Yeah, so.
Compelling ends, most narrowly tailored means.
Yeah.
So is your focus on whether the states could satisfy the compelling end component?
Yes.
To do what?
That's,
To
I'm
keep
still,
people out?
I'm still working on what my focus is gonna be in the note on that, cause it's kind of hard to like fully imagine like what that exactly might manifest as. But, you know, thinking about, I think especially what I think is like a kind of pseudo like refugee situation.
Yeah.
Like a refugee camp in the state, and being like, there's 150,000 people from California going to Nevada. We don't want them all going to Las Vegas. If you're gonna come here, you need to go to this predestined place.
Is that right? Are there 150,000 people from California?
I know there's like 150, not like, this was, I know, I remember I was read 2 weeks after the fires that there were about 170,000 people displaced due to the fires. I was just predicting, like, let's say if it's a mega fire in the future and there's that many people needing to leave to go somewhere else. I mean, it's very
Well, it's
hypothetical.
the trickle flood concept, right?
It's
That-
just like, it's, as things continue, you know, because obviously we know climate change is exponential in terms of how, you know, things are gonna get. It builds upon itself as it gets warmer and more stuff melts. Ocean levels rise, you know, which means warmer temperatures, which means bad, worse hurricanes and all this other stuff. So like, it's like, as the decades go on, it's gonna continue to get more and more bad. Like, it's gonna go worse hurricanes and stuff. So it's just thinking about, if we don't have some sort of change, or if a judge, the court system doesn't start to kind of rethink the strict scrutiny test and whether, yeah, essentially. So, still working on it. Like, I'm still kind of developing this idea, but it's really just like an analysis of the right to travel and strict scrutiny through the lens of like climate displacement is like what I'm really trying to get at, is that like people are gonna be forced to move, and what happens if the state tries to limit that ability, given that like traveling and the right to travel is such like an ingrained thing that people don't think about.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, cool.
Just, it's gonna bring up considerations that might come up in the future, because like you leave your house every day. I mean, there's plenty of articles that have written that like idea of like, you leave your house, you go from one state to another for work, you don't think about it.
Right, especially those of us who live in DC, you're in like
Right.
3 states or a district that's not a state, in like
You know,
15
so
minutes, we can hit them all.
it's like, what happens if a natural disaster spurred on by climate change, because that's a whole nother paper writing about like how a natural disaster that doesn't appear to be due to climate change is actually caused by climate change, like a hurricane or something, because people are just like, oh, it's a hurricane, that's just a natural disaster. Well, no, climate change probably made it a lot worse than what it was, than what it should have been, or something like that. Anyways, I'm rambling, but that's essentially what I'm writing on, is that idea. So.
Would you pronounce your name or spell it for me, please? Again?
It's Viola, Viola.
Okay. So Viola, in you're
My
from?
surname is Albertinazzi. It's even worse. Albertinazzi. Yes.
Albertinazzi.
Yes.
That's a pretty, so,
That's what I said, it made me want to go to Italy.
Yeah,
When
yeah.
she
Exactly.
pronounced it for me this morning.
Exactly.
so what about, I'm just curious about Italian constitutional law. What have courts said about how
Yeah, that's
process that
interesting.
Italy
I was
applies.
thinking about the difference that we have, like United States have with the European system. For example, in Italy we have Article 9 in 2002 that was reformed, and we have a special protection for environment, which is quite new because we didn't have before. And I know that U.S. Constitution doesn't have a protection specifically for environment. Now also the High Constitutional Court is always talking about the problem connected with the environment. So I think, I mean, I'm more worried about United States now, because for the government, as a foreign student, I mean as a foreign worker, it's really a powerful country. We need United States, especially in all the international agreements. And if we miss the presence of the US, that could be a problem for all of us. I also wrote a thesis for my JD in Italy about, in general, the principle of intergenerational equity and how this is connected with the environment. And I analyzed many cases of the European Court of Human Rights, and it was interesting because still there is a problem that the courts are addressing so much. So, yeah.
What does the European Court of Human Rights have to say about intergenerational justice and climate?
They don't qualify still the principle, but like we had an important decision in April, I think, 2024, against the government of Switzerland, and they said, okay, in the European Convention of Human Rights, there is not the right to protection of the environment explicitly, but they have said this right is connected with other rights, like right to life, right to private life, right to, I mean, many other rights that the European Convention has.
Like Article 3, Article 8.
8, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, but also this is a problem. I mean, why can we not put into the Convention of Human Rights, of European Human Rights, that article explicitly? Because it would be easier to get some cases. But of course the states don't want to. So.
You mean to add a provision that recognizes the right
Yeah.
to a healthy climate or something? I mean, healthy environment?
Exactly.
Well, there are efforts to do that. Weren't there meetings last week or something to do that?
They are talking about, I know that someone wants to add a protocol, like for example, compared to the Inter-American system, they have a protocol of San Salvador that explicitly says this right, but still at the European Convention there's not.
Right.
So even that, I mean, that's another difference.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because the European Convention, and notwithstanding that it doesn't have a right to a healthy climate, there are dozens of cases decided by the European Court of Human Rights that get to the same place, at least in my reading, through a right to family, or a right to life, or a right to privacy even. So how much more space would it give a right to a healthy environment to have it specific when it's already implicit?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm wondering about.
Yeah, no, me too. I've got the same questions. But I think if they can include a special provision about the right to health environment, I think it would be better. I mean, it would be easier for judges as well to do the cases and provide an answer.
Okay. So Jeff, I have a question for you. I don't know if I'm allowed.
I accept the question.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, I feel self-conscious about it because Mary Ann and I, we were in a clinic a long time ago at a law school, and the clinic sued EPA about water quality standards and TMDLs and continuing planning process and ESA consultation for every mid-Atlantic state and Puerto Rico and Florida. It's like trying to help. So if that yielded any sort of discomfort with your job, I don't know what you did with the Office of Water, but my question is about water. Some states provide for a right to water, and others a right to fish and hunt. this is totally out of left field, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are about the constitutionalization of a right to water in addressing some of these displacement issues. It's a huge stretch, but I'm wondering, is there a connection that can be made? Do they, did EPA ever think about, I don't know, what do you think?
I doubt EPA ever thought about that. One of the things that I wanted to give some more thought to is most of the discussion today has been focused on the relocation of people and not so much the context of the environment, physical environment that they end up in, not just whether it's urban or not, but what the natural characteristics of the environment are. And that goes to, is there adequate water supply for people? How are you going to handle other questions about protecting the environment? And so I think it's fair to ask, when you have large shifts of population, are there environmental consequences as a result of that? And should people be encouraged to go to one place or discouraged to go to a different one based on natural resource availability, or what we expect to be that, in addition to the lack of a significant climate risk. So we're saying these are safer places from a climate point of view, but they might not necessarily be safer from some other ecological point of view. And they might have ecological damages in some places, whereas they wouldn't in others. So I think there's an argument that is a reasonable tack to take, whether or not it ever, I don't know of any statutory authority to sort of carry that out at this point.
So displaced by climate, but resulting in different kinds of environmental degradation in the place that receives the concentration of people, and puts additional stresses on water supplies and other things. Is that right? Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the Clean Water Act. Section 4.1 of the Clean Water Act has a state kind of state review authority, and you might hypothesize a scenario in which a federal government had a plan to put a lot of people in Florida in southern Georgia. The state of Georgia might say, well, we don't have the water supply to accommodate those people. Therefore, sorry, we don't really think that's a good plan, and we have, this would be a consistency review type approach. Under the Clean Water Act, we're not allowing that. It's kind of a stretch to the current way the statute's written. But the general idea is that the states, with respect to water resources, or at least with respect to water pollution control, have some, they need to sign off before a federal plan just gets dumped on them. The CZM statute has the same consistency review. And I would imagine that if there ever were a big federal statute that talked about channeling people into different places as they relocate from unsafe places, that there would need to be some kind of state level check and balance.
And if I recall, under section 401A of the state consistency review, it doesn't only have to be about water pollution. It's written more broadly than just to address or redress discharges. Again, I don't know if there's something.
Yeah, I think the states generally have left that authority a little bit. They haven't used it.
Underutilized.
Underused, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe because they haven't found at, but they might.
Yeah. Right. So, so Peter, that's like another thought.
That is something I address as water supply as one of the compelling state interest reasons that a state may be.
Sure, and what Jeff is talking about is this other way that states could limit migration or.
Right.
But through a provision of the Clean Water Act.
Right.
Yeah.
The inspiration for this was obviously all of the natural disasters that have occurred in
Yeah.
various places, but part of it is also just given current climate, political climate, there's a tendency for certain states to get really creative in justifying a lot of things
Yeah.
that they do. And so this was kind of the like, how could a state, you know, a set of, you know, state legislators with, you know, an AG or whoever get creative in a time of emergency to like kind of limit people's ability to like flee or come to them or whatever, given what's going on. So there's a lot of ways. I read an article recently about the idea of the water, like the water idea in the same context, in terms of like compelling state interest stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of ways that the states might be able to like at least try to do something about it, which that's the other part about my paper is like I'm trying not to take a stance because I do understand that there is genuine competing interests in a way, like the people that live in the state versus the people that might need to get into like want to go in the state, and you don't know whether all of them are gonna permanently relocate, whether they're temporarily relocating. You know, data shows that there's like genuine strains on housing market, job market, you know, all of that stuff on these receiving areas.
Yeah.
So there are like, I mean, I don't think you should like put climate refugees in like an internment camp or something. Like, I don't think that's right. But there is like a genuine balance of interest that does need to go on. So I'm not trying to like be like, the state's always gonna be wrong in this situation, they should never be able to do anything.
Yeah.
But I'm also trying to like balance the fact that like there are these refugees who need somewhere to go and they shouldn't be having their constitutional rights like pretty obviously infringed upon for some degree, which is why I'm saying there needs to be this broader, more kind of approach to considering these problems, because there's so many factors that aren't just the environment, that aren't just constitutional rights.
Yeah, it's an impact on transportation,
Right,
education,
transportation,
water,
economic,
fill-up
local,
rate, yeah.
local, national economics, like, it's almost too much for a judge probably to consider.
Yeah.
But given our justice system, a judge at some point is probably going to have to handle this. What might they do? Like,
Well, have we seen what they like to, not judges, you're right, I mean, you know, some mayors reverse policy in their ads, for
Right,
example. you
right.
know. So we've seen what lawmakers do.
which is like why I've kind of looked at the COVID situation
Yeah.
as like the most recent emergency example of like public health limiting travel. It's like just the most clearest recent example. It's fresh in people's minds, like of what happened. And I think the public health but the public health interest that they talk about with COVID and pandemics generally is very broadly defined as to what that means. And courts across the country have taken different approaches to, there's like a thing called the Jacobson test, which was like, the Jacobson approach from like 1905 or something, but the courts are all over the place in terms of how they're handle that. So it's like also not unified in any degree in terms of how district courts across the country approach similar issues.
Yeah.
Some say interstate travel is a right, it's part of the right. Some say interstate travel isn't part of the right to travel. Some say, you know, this, that, and the other thing. So it's definitely a broad topic, but I'm chipping away at it is what I'll say for someone who just started looking into this in like October. So, but I read your and Ira's article, the Constitutional Revolution one, which was very helpful in terms of putting things into perspective for me.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, the Supreme Court seems, or has seemed for like 30 years to be a court that's fairly sympathetic and then some towards state rights.
Yeah.
Now, except when like states are getting out ahead of
Right.
the federal government with environmental programs or, you know, the green governance or fill in the blank, you know, sometimes.
My final conclusion kind of paragraph talks about how like the climate crisis generally is going to bring about like a fundamental like a forced fundamental change in how we like, or a reckoning into like our union, like what is the union
Yeah.
mean in the United States?
That's
Like,
to put to a test, but the
it's
Supreme
what
Court
it
really
means.
believes what it says
Right.
about states' rights.
what it means and how the states interact with one another, and
Yeah.
that's kind of my closing statement, which I wrote in advance. Cause I was like, all right, how do I get that to the point that this sentence makes sense? Because I was like, I want this to be the closer. But yeah, so
So I think we're supposed to be headed back at 3 o'clock, is that right?
I can look.
yeah, I checked on that.
And just one other closing thought, which I think will be great to bring us all back to, I think what Ira, an adaptation leader, are hoping to accomplish through this series of discussions, papers, et cetera, is to avoid having to react in an emergency kind of way, right? So if we can get ahead of it, which is a monumental task, but to not leave it necessarily in the hands of, you know, emergency decisions on who can do what, but to have some sort of a integrated plan. I don't know if it would happen nationwide, but at least for hopefully some of the self-declared receiving cities and communities, that they could be better equipped and be prepared for an influx of people, with all the things that we just talked about, transportation, water, workforce development, housing, you know, there's so many different things. But, sorry.
Just one quick, very quick thing. So the Army Corps is spending a lot of money now developing what they call coastal storm studies for major metropolitan areas all along the coast. And their past practice has generally been to focus on structural protection or elevation of properties as the recommended remedy that the federal government would support with some local and state financial contribution as kind of a path forward for managing coastal flooding, mostly derived from storms as opposed to spillover. One of the policies that they have as part of that is that they have been discouraging and not recommending relocation as their strategy for federal support, because they want to see a unified approach to reduce the risk. And in other words, they want everyone in a community to agree to relocate if relocation is the answer. And when local government is presented with the, well, we could do relocation, but we, the federal government, will not implement eminent domain proceedings. You, the local government, have to do that. Most local governments are going, well,
Yeah.
no, we're not gonna do that. And so relocation immediately goes off the table. And all the potential for using the Corps' process and all the money that would go through the Corps to fund not just relocation, but pointing people to a better, safer location is being lost and spent on seawalls.
Yeah.
And I guess my question is there any way we could use the legal process and all the uncertainty with respect to the takings jurisprudence to reduce the risk that local governments feel with respect to use of eminent domain? Take the fear factor out of it, and mostly what they fear is not so much there's some political blowback, but they fear being tied up in court for decades paying hefty lawyers' fees from some rich stubborn people who refuse to leave their McMansions to make a relocation thing happen.
I mean, it's.
I just thought I'd ask.
It's complicated because I forget who was talking about it at lunch, but, you know, insurance companies have turned the tide, against those who are building in areas that might become flooded. So that's a private action. but how to disincentivize living in places like that and how to incentivize moving. And that's where federal dollars can come in. But you're right, if somebody doesn't wanna go, and the government only has eminent domain to exercise, and then it gets into, it's hard to avoid litigation.
Well, my small answer to this is to continue to hammer on investment-backed expectation and
For the takings analysis, right?
to build the capacity for local governments to say whether they did it or not, or whether NOAA did it, or whether FEMA did it. Somebody told you 10 years ago that this property was going to flood and this property was going to be a total loss. And you don't have an investment-backed expectation to avoid a takings or to fight the takings. And we think we can beat you on the other prongs. And so you, the local government attorney, should feel confident that this is going to stand up. And we've built a series of court cases that show that it will. But we're not there yet.
It'd be nice to have the Supreme Court take one of those cases and
Right.
rule in that way,
Right.
apply the Penn Central factors that way. But I think that's interesting, that's the way to do it. And I think the way you just described it is to focus on that, reasonable investment-backed expectation and say you didn't have one.
And that's part of the reason a lot of states are fighting the flood disclosure laws.
Mhm.